Hi everybody, my name is Dave Harm and I am an alcoholic. I'd like to talk a little bit today about slips and how at times we can beat ourselves up over them. I started my own journey in recovery on January 16th, 1986. And I attacked sobriety as hard as I could. I wanted it to stick. I had my own way of doing things. And I only lasted a little over 5 years of being sober. And I had a slip, and I lasted 2 years with that slip. And during those 2 years, everything that I gained and recovered with my sobriety, I lost and lost a lot more. When I finally made it back into the recovery mode, I wanted to make sure I never had to go through this again. Deep down inside me, I know there is still another drunk in me. But I don't know if there's another recovery still in me. So I did everything I could to make sure that this recovery lasted. And by the grace of God and the fellowship of people like you viewing this, I've been sober for over 17 years. What were the differences between this sobriety of 17 years and the sobriety that lasted only 5 years? That is what I worked on. That is what I wanted to learn when I started this. I did not want to repeat the same mistakes. First major difference was acceptance. My first sobriety, I admitted to being an alcoholic. And in actuality, that was pretty easy. Many times over the course of my drinking career, I would sit in a bar at closing time and tell the bartender that I was an alcoholic and I needed to change my way of life. And then the next night I'd be right back in that bar. Admitting was real easy. I could do it to get a date, get some girl into bed with me. Yes, I'm an alcoholic, and I will start tomorrow with changing my attitude on drinking. This sobriety, I accepted that I am an alcoholic. It was one thing to admit it. It was another thing to accept it. By accepting that I was an alcoholic, I said to myself that one drink was too many. I could not drink responsibly. I could not drink socially. And if I did drink, made that choice, somebody would get hurt. Second thing that was a major difference for me was AA. My first sobriety, in 5 years, I went to AA 2 times. First time I went, I didn't really get much out of it. I just sat in the back and listened, and I really couldn't even tell you what I listened to. I just didn't feel like I belonged there. Towards the end of my 5 years, I decided to give AA another chance. In that meeting, I sat and listened, and I couldn't believe how stupid these people were. Yeah, I said that. They just weren't touching me. They weren't making any sense. I mean, here were people with 20, 25 years sobriety, and they were talking about being fearful of drinking. Heck, I had 5 years sobriety without AA. I wasn't fearful of drinking. I just wanted some peace. This time, from day one, I went to AA. My first 2 years, I went anywhere from 3 to 10 times a week. And what was amazing was that very first meeting I went to, I could not believe how smart these people were. They were the same people that I seen 3 years earlier in meetings that I thought were dumb. In those 3 years, they got really intelligent, really bright. I started to listen and started to learn, and by doing that, I started to share. Third thing was the 12 steps. My first sobriety, I looked at the steps, and I did them. I opened up Big Book and looked at them. I went 1, 2, 3, no problem. I did the first 3 steps in 10 minutes. 4 and 5 I didn't want to do until I had more sobriety under me, so I'm going to put those to the side for a little bit. 6 and 7 done. 8 and 9, I can't do those until I do 4 and 5, but I will do them eventually. And 10, 11, 12, no problem. I did my first 12 steps in maybe a half hour, maybe. This time I went in with an attitude that I needed to know what these 12 steps were about. I didn't want to, but I needed to. I did not want to drink anymore. I spent close to a month just on the first step. It took me nearly 6 months to get through the first 3 steps. And I look back now and I realize that those first 3 steps, for me, were the most important. I needed a strong foundation in recovery, and those 3 steps would give it to me. Fourth major difference was a sponsor. My first time I was way too intelligent, way too smart for AA, so I didn't need no sponsor. They were useless. This time I knew I could not do it alone, and I needed the wisdom and support of somebody who had walked the path ahead of me. Lastly, and probably the most important thing that difference was between this sobriety and my first one was a higher power. When I started this journey in 1986, I wanted absolutely nothing to do with a higher power. If you know my story, you could halfway understand why. I grew up in a very religious home, but there was absolutely no higher power in that home. I watched my mom being beat to an inch of her life. I seen blood flying through the walls. I watched 2 drunk parents totally destroy themselves, and every time I asked for help, I was faced with cold regrets, cold people just walking away. The cops wouldn't help, the church wouldn't help, nobody would help. I was only 7 years old, 8 years old, and I was on my own. I didn't need a higher power then. I certainly didn't need it to get sober. This time, I went to meetings, and I still did not want a higher power. I wanted nothing to do with a higher power. This time as I went to meetings, and I heard people speaking, people with 20 years, 30 years sobriety, 5 years, 2 days sobriety, and they were talking about a higher power and how it changed their lives. I wasn't sure what this higher power thing was about, but I had to find one. And I think the thing that saved me was that a higher power in AA is not a religious God. It is your choice of who your higher power is. And with that knowledge, I went on a journey to find a higher power. I started with the Eastern philosophies, Buddhism and Hinduism, Confucianism, all of them. And then I went into the ancient mythologies, which I fell in love with, Greek mythology and Roman mythology. And I turned around and looked at the Western religions. And I began piecemealing my own higher power together. And then I went and looked really closely at Native American beliefs. And between all of these segments of different religions throughout time, different spiritual philosophies throughout time, I found my higher power. And that higher power has been with me ever since I acknowledged his presence, ever since I decided I needed a friend in my life that could help me. Not just somebody I could pick up on a phone with, somebody that I could have an intimate, one-on-one conversation with, that we could share our journey together. And so far that journey has worked. And I do believe that 99.9% of it is because I have a strong friendship with my higher power. When I came back into this program, I beat myself up for a long time because I slept. Looking back at it now, I realize I needed that slip. I needed to be humbled. I needed to lose my arrogance. And I needed to get on my knees and pray and tell others that I needed help. I needed to not only find a higher power of my own making, but I also needed to find my higher power in others. And I say that a lot in meetings. I'll talk about my higher power, and I'll kind of span my finger around the room and say, I can see my higher power in each and every one of you. And that is a joy to recovery, something I never would have experienced. So if you have some sobriety and you end up having a slip, don't beat yourself up over it. Get back in the room. Get back in as soon as you can. Because it took me 2 years, and during those 2 years I lost a family, I lost a job, I lost friends, I lost a house. It wasn't worth it. Wishing you the best, and enjoy your journey, because it's a marvelous path that we are taking, and a wonderful life awaits.